Now, Rachel, I last interviewed you in May last year. The election was 2 months off. You were talking in front of a big room of chief execs and business people who were all incredibly excited and enthused about your pro-business message, the sort of pro-business stance that you were taking there. We're now 6 months on from that election, and I think it's no exaggeration to say that there's profound disappointment in the business community by some of the decisions that you've taken and also some of the decisions that you haven't taken. And it's a feeling that could be summed up by a quote from a business person that was given to my colleague James McIntosh. And this business person said, "We were very hopeful with the pro-business signalling that came in the early days of this new government. But you can't say you're pro-business and just think the words matter. You have to follow through with something that's pro-business, and the budget just wasn't. It's a stark contrast to the US, and that contrast is only going to get sharper." So my opening question to you is, when are you going to start walking the walk and not just talking the talk about being pro-business?
Well, I think if you look at some of the things we've been saying just in the last few days, people can see that this is a proudly pro-business government. Just this week, we've announced changes to some of our regulatory framework. The chair of the Competition and Markets Authority has left, recognising that this government wants the regulators to take a more pro-growth attitude, to lean into growth rather than just regulating for risk. The reforms we're making to the planning system to make it easier to build in Britain, the reforms we're making to capital markets, particularly to the pensions system, to unlock long-term patient capital, to help businesses to grow and eventually to list in the London market. But let me take head on the challenge around my budget in October. It wasn't necessarily the budget that I wanted to deliver as Chancellor, but when I entered office in July last year, I faced a situation where there was a £22 billion gap between what the previous government was spending and what they had budgeted for. And I had to make difficult decisions very early on, some in the first month of government and some in the budget in October, to put our public finances on a firm footing. And I would just say, I take that criticism, I hear that criticism, but what I haven't heard is any serious alternative to doing what I had to do in October, because if I hadn't have stabilised the public finances, we would be in a position like previous Conservative governments have got in the last few years, where the public finances have been clearly unsustainable, and therefore there's been a lot of market pressure and turbulence in the UK. Or we would have been in a position where businesses would have known I needed to come back with more tax increases the next year, and uncertainty would have pervaded over the UK economy. So I'm not going to apologise for putting our public finances on a firm footing. That was the right thing to do, because stability is absolutely non-negotiable, both from an economic stability perspective, but also from a business perspective, because businesses need that bedrock of stability to invest. So it was the budget that was necessary, but beyond that budget, whether it is planning reform, regulatory reform, capital markets reform, this is a pro-business government, listening to business, removing those barriers that have stopped businesses from investing in Britain for too long.
Okay, so we'll come back to the budget in a bit. On the issue of regulation, I think a lot of business people find it slightly odd that you're talking to regulators about how to generate growth. Surely you should be talking to business about how to, it seems sort of counterintuitive to ask the regulators when they're there sort of almost to stop growth.
Well, of course we're talking to businesses about how to improve things, and I don't think any businesses would say differently. If you look at the changes at the Competition and Markets Authority this week, that's been widely welcomed by government. But also look at some of the changes that the Financial Conduct Authority have put forward in their suggestions to government about making it easier to lend in the mortgage market, for example. Look at the changes changes that the Bank of England announced just last week about delaying the implementation of Basel III. Those are things that have come direct from regulators because of the steer from this government that we want them to regulate for growth, not just regulate for risk. So some of the regulators are stepping up to the plate, recognising that the number one mission of this new government is to grow the economy, and they want to be part of that programme. And if regulators don't want to be part of that programme, then we will make further changes.
Okay, so I want to talk about innovation, because obviously, you know, for a successful economy to grow, you need innovation. But one of the, I'm being very specific here, but one of the issues that I hear, for example, is that early stage tech startups in the UK, they have to comply with regulations like mandatory workplace pensions. Now, it seems to me that somebody joining a tech startup, the last thing on their mind is, I need to make sure I sort out my pension requirements. They're thinking, how are we going to innovate? How are we going to get investors? How much money can I make before I move on to my next startup? And yet these workplace requirements act as a burden on these sort of innovative tech startups, or any startups for that matter. So why not make a sort of grand gesture and remove some of these regulatory burdens on these small companies to allow them to sort of move faster?
It's about 10 years or so since the UK government made changes around automatic enrolment into pensions. Actually, I would say it was one of the best examples of cross-party support in the UK for a change that has increased people's savings for retirement, and has also increased the pool of money available to help grow the economy. So 11 million more people are now saving for retirement who weren't previously, because of automatic enrolment. Now, people can opt out, so you're automatically enrolled, but if you choose to opt out, you can. So there's no compulsion on people saving into those retirement funds. So if those innovators and those employees say, oh, actually, I don't want to be part of that scheme, that's totally up to them.
I think it's more the burden that's on the employer, because if you're a small startup, you don't have money to have an HR director, so it falls often on the founder, him or herself, to sort of sort these things out. When really
it's actually in the UK pretty easy to set up an automatically enrolled pension. All of the big pension providers provide them. Nest, the government-backed scheme, provides them. And as I say, people don't have to participate if they don't want to. If they want to take a risk and go and work for a startup, they don't have to take part in those pension schemes. But let me say something more widely about our pensions reform, because the big challenge in our pension system is not that people are saving too much for their retirement. That is still a challenge. The problem is that money that is being saved for retirement isn't working well enough for savers, and it's not working well enough for the UK economy. So we've got the second largest assets under management in the world in the UK in our pensions system, but less than 5% of that money is invested in UK equities, even less in unlisted venture, etc. And so the reforms we're trying to make to our pension system is about consolidating the pension industry, a smaller number of bigger funds that then have the economies of scale to invest more wisely in things that deliver better returns for savers, but crucially help grow the economy. And this goes to the point of the startups you're talking about, because the big challenge that startups say to me is not that they have to pay a small amount into pensions, but that they're not able to raise money in the UK to scale up their business, to grow it to the size where it can achieve its potential. And the pension reforms we're putting in is about changing all of that so that fast-growing businesses in the UK can access finance in the UK, and then hopefully then list and stay in the UK rather than going to America. Because one great UK entrepreneur said to me recently that every time his business raises money, they become a bit more American, because that is where the money is. Yeah. And yet we have got a huge untapped pool of capital in the UK that at the moment is often sitting in cash and government bonds that could be working better for savers and could be working better for our real economy. So our pensions reforms, we just finished a consultation on it last week. The pensions bill will be coming in the first half of this year. It's about radically changing how our pensions industry works, and I think that's really exciting for entrepreneurs, and meets one of the big challenges that businesses have said to us, that despite the fact that we've got so much such a big asset management and pension industry in the UK, the sector does not deliver in the way it should for our real economy.
So that leads nicely on to my next question, which is about competitiveness. Now, on I'd say pretty much every single measure, the US beats Europe and the UK on competitiveness. And there's a consensus on the continent now that much of that derives from regulation that comes out of Brussels. It's all set out in the Draghi report. Now, obviously, the UK is no longer a member of the EU, and yet you don't seem... but yet so far it doesn't appear to have sort of wanted to make the most of this unique position that it's in. So my question is why, wouldn't it be an interesting twist of fate or a twist of history if it was a Labour government that decided to derive the full benefits of Brexit? I mean, it's there for the taking. Why don't you do that rather than existing in this kind of limbo where you're neither heading back towards Europe in terms of trade, but nor are you diving into the opportunities that not being part of the EU give the UK?
I think there are opportunities, as you say, to diverge from the European Union in terms of regulations. And I would say there's sort of two spaces in particular where we are doing just that. First of all is in the area of AI, and the second is the area of financial services. So I mentioned the Bank of England delaying the implementation of Basel III that we announced just over a week ago. The Europeans haven't announced that. I think that gives us a competitive advantage in UK financial services, and one that we should use to advantage firms operating out of London and the UK. But the second area is in AI, where I think the European Union has taken an overburdensome, over-regulatory approach, which puts off investment in AI, and also means that those economies miss out on new applications and new ideas and new technologies. And we don't want to be in that place in Britain. We published last Monday, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, published the AI Action Plan, and that included a number of really exciting things to make Britain a great place to invest if you're a business in the AI or tech space. The first is these AI investment zones. We've set up the first of them in Culham, just in Oxfordshire, where there is a large amounts of excess supply of energy that can then power data centres. And we're setting these up around the country to bring in that investment in data centres to power the AI revolution. The second is around regulation, where our Prime Minister has been really clear that he wants to take a much more cautious approach to regulation compared to what the European Union is doing, that we don't regulate to death a fast-growing and exciting
not
sector
cautious,
of the economy.
But more,
Sorry. So a more wait and see. Yeah. So wait to see what the applications are and then regulate, rather than regulate before we even know what the technology is going to do, which seems to be the European approach. So we are taking advantage of those opportunities, and proactively so. And people would have absolutely seen that in the AI Action Plan. And I have a chance this week, whilst I've been in Davos, to talk to some of the big AI and tech companies, particularly US companies. And the UK is their second home. And I was with Ruth Porrett from Google and Julie Sweet from Accenture yesterday on a panel, and they were saying that our AI Action Plan is best in class, and that it is attracting that investment and innovation into the UK economy. And our industrial strategy that we published in draft form just a couple of months ago has AI at the centre of that for three reasons, really. First of all, Britain wants to be a place where we attract firms at the technological frontier, and I was really pleased to be with Demis Hassapis from Google DeepMind last night. We want to see greater diffusion of technology and AI through the rest of the economy to help that sort of long tail of lower productivity firms really step up. And third, there's a massive potential to use AI better in the delivery of public services, to deliver a better service for citizens, but also, and this is attractive for me as Chancellor managing tight budgets, to take some of the costs out of running government. And there are big opportunities, and we're working with some of the big tech firms about how we can exploit those for the UK taxpayer and citizen.
So you're talking about a light touch regulation around AI, this sounds great. But at the same time, there still seems to be a sort of default towards regulation. So, for example, you're pursuing the idea of a football regulator. Why regulate one area where the UK is absolutely winning the Premier League? It's a huge British success story. But you're talking about a football regulator. Isn't that just the wrong approach to be taking?
It's to help some of our smaller clubs that have really struggled in recent years and often are at the heart of our local communities. So there's been a few scandals in the UK where small clubs have been taken over and then been driven to the edge of bankruptcy. So that's the problem that we're trying to address there. But look, I hope that people see from the leadership of our Prime Minister to the work that I'm doing, the announcements just yesterday from our Environment Secretary to allow housing development to go ahead, even when... so we've just created something called a nature restoration fund. So when you make a housing development, instead of having to make it nature neutral in the place that you're doing the development, you can pay into a fund where you can have nature positive investment somewhere else, but you can get on with the housing and you don't have to make it neutral in the place you're doing the development. That's a big change for our environmental regulation. It was holding back housing development in the UK. This should unlock about 150 sites immediately in the UK where we can get building. So look, it may be the case that people look at the UK and think we are overly burdensome in terms of regulation. That's changing. The Prime Minister has made that a key priority, whether it is the changes at the Competition and Markets Authority, the changes I've instigated at the financial regulators, or indeed just some of the changes we made yesterday on environmental reforms. And just today, our Prime Minister's announced cutting the number of legal challenges that can be brought against new developments to stop the time taken through court cases, judicial reviews, holding up developments. So the idea that we are big regulators, that is changing under the leadership of this government and this Prime Minister.
Rachel, I think what you need is a chainsaw. You need to get out and sort of make a big, bold gesture. Do something that captivates people's attention, because what I hear a lot is this sort of real sense of gloom, but you're talking as if, you're planning to sort of rip up all these regulations and do things. I think it seems to me, have you thought about trying to deliver the message in a slightly more, dare I say it, boosterish kind of way?
I'll go back to London and buy a chainsaw.
All right, we'll look out for that on our TV screens. Okay, so on the EU, I think a lot of businesses, again, they're slightly baffled. You've got this big majority. You've got 5 years until the next election. If you're worried about upsetting over Europe, you've got 4 years to forget about it. Why not make a big, bold gesture towards the EU? You want growth. Growth comes from trade. What's holding you back there?
I think you've just, in the previous question, shown that we've got to get the balance right. We can take advantage of some of the things from being outside of the European Union by being more flexible and more innovative when it comes to regulation. But yeah, there are too many barriers, particularly for small businesses who want to trade and export around Europe, and we want to improve that. We've just appointed somebody to lead that work for us in government, because we do want to get a better deal. It's almost 9 years now, Emma, since the British people voted to leave the European Union. That is settled. What we want to do, though, is improve upon the deal that the previous government secured, which is not one that works well enough, either for the UK economy or indeed for the European economy. I was talking to the German finance minister last month when I was in Brussels, and he said that the UK used to be the 4th biggest export market for Germany. It's now the 12th. Right? So it's not just that Brexit isn't delivering for the UK, it's also not delivering very well for other European countries who are finding increased barriers in exporting to consumers in the UK. So we're looking to make changes to that, particularly in terms of trades in goods.
So what about the offer that I think the EU Trade Commissioner talked about yesterday to the BBC of inviting the UK to join this pan-European customs area? It's not the customs union, but it's this wider pan-European customs area. Is that something that Labour's going to take up?
Well, we're also doing free trade deals around the world. So we are in negotiations at the moment with the Gulf countries, some of the fastest growing economies, are trade and investment deals. So I think we've got to strike the right balance. We're a government that is re-engaging and resetting relationships with countries around the world. I was in China last weekend, getting better licenses and quotas for UK financial services companies doing business in China. I was the first Chancellor to attend the Eurogroup meeting of European finance ministers in Brussels last month. So, and we're looking to do deals with countries around the world. So, I think we've got to get that balance right. We're not going back into the European Union, the single market, or the customs union, but I think there is a better and more bespoke deal we can get, particularly to make it easier to export goods around Europe.
So Donald Trump, recently elected, obviously takes a very different approach towards China and tariffs. And what are you going to do? I mean, have you got any plans for the UK to erect tariffs if, say, some sort of trade war takes off? Or are we going to be is the UK going to be the only country sort of holding firm on free trade while all around, trade barriers go up?
Well, free trade has been good for Britain. It keeps prices down for UK consumers, which is incredibly important. We've just gone through globally, including in the UK, a massive cost of living crisis. Tariffs only put up prices for consumers. So I think we'd want to be very careful about going down that route.
But how will you respond, though, if the new US administration imposes tariffs on the UK? What kind of, how will you respond? Have you thought about it? Have you thought about what you could do to retaliate?
Well, I'm not going to sort of comment on hypotheticals. The challenge that President Trump is trying to address is countries that run persistent large surpluses with the trade surpluses with the US. That is not the case for the UK. Depending on your measurement, we either run a small deficit or a small surplus with the United States. We are not the problem that President Trump is trying to deal with. So we will make that case strongly in any in any future discussions around tariffs. But I believe that the UK economy and countries around the world benefit from free trade. Competition is a good thing to keep businesses on their toes, and tariff-free trade is good for consumers in increasing choice and reducing prices.
I mean, part of Donald Trump's fear about China isn't just pure trade, it's that there are national security concerns.
Yeah.
I mean, do you share those concerns?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we share those concerns, and there should be areas where you would want to keep things very separate. But when it comes to getting banking licenses for HSBC or Standard Chartered Bank to operate in China, that's nothing to do with national security. It's common sense. And in fact, the licenses that I secured for UK listed banks last week in China are licenses that US investment banks already have. The reason the UK doesn't have them is because we haven't engaged with China in an economic and financial dialogue or in any other way for the last few years, and as a result it was British businesses that missed out. So when it comes to issues that are not about national security, I do think it's important to engage. I will always act in the UK's national interest. I will always stand up for UK businesses. I was pleased to be joined on that delegation by a number of senior UK business leaders, and to be able to get a good deal for them, which is a good deal for the UK economy, jobs and investment in my home country.
So one of the other things that I've heard a lot in these few days in Davos has been this fear that companies that are listed in London on the London Stock Exchange are going to up sticks and go to the US. What would you say to a company currently listed in London or that's trying to make a decision about where to list? Why should they stay in London? Why not go to the US where clearly, the business environment is more favourable?
This isn't just a UK thing. This is for listed companies around the world. You've seen a move, well, two moves really. First of all, delisting and going private, and second, relisting or dual listing in the US market. One of the reasons why we are looking to make the reforms to capital markets, particularly around the pensions reforms that I've mentioned, is to try and keep more more businesses in the UK, because it's not, the decision about where to locate isn't made at the time of listing. It often happens a lot earlier. And if you're raising your capital in the US, you start drifting towards the US. So the capital markets reforms are about trying to keep more businesses during that scale-up journey in the UK. But in July last year, we changed the listing rules in the UK to make it easier for founders to keep some control over their business, matching, mirroring some of the reforms that have already happened in US markets. Later this year, we're going to be introducing intermittent trading in the London Stock Exchange, so companies that are not listed can intermittently trade in the market to raise capital in the London markets. That's something that no stock market in the world does today, but will be an innovation you'll be able to use in the UK to help start and scale up businesses to raise finance. So there's lots of exciting things happening under David Schwimmer's leadership at the London Stock Exchange Group, which I think gives a pause for thought for companies that are thinking about upping sticks and relisting in the US. But we know we've got more to do. I'm not saying we've done everything we need to do. We've been in government for just 6 months, but we've got started in reforming the planning system, in reforming the regulatory system, reforming our capital markets to make Britain a better place to do business and to invest. And we're determined to carry on doing just that so that we can be competitive and ultimately so that we can improve living standards for working families in Britain.
So one other thing I want to talk to you about is energy. Energy is very expensive in the UK, and you talk about wanting to encourage AI and data centres and electric vehicles. How are you going to do that when energy costs are so high?
Yeah, look, it's been a real challenge in Europe the last 3 years, particularly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Europe has been hard hit in terms of energy prices by that war, and it is a reminder that we need to wean ourselves off oil and gas, whose prices have gone up so significantly. It is why in the UK we are investing heavily in homegrown renewables, primarily to boost our energy security in the UK, but also to bring good jobs to Britain. So we've ended the moratorium that's existed for more than a decade on building onshore wind
yes,
in the UK.
Yes, that's true, but you also haven't lifted the moratorium on oil and gas drilling, and I wonder whether you've ever considered taking the all of the above energy approach that President Obama, in fact all the US presidents have opted for when it comes to energy policy. You've made it easier for one thing, but there's another lever you could pull there.
You know, Emma, the North Sea is a rapidly declining basin for extraction of oil and gas. It's a very mature field. We've committed to honour all existing licences, including licences that haven't yet started drilling, 2 or 3 of those, and all existing licences can be fully exploited. But the big opportunity in the UK is in the area of renewables. Particularly new technologies like floating offshore wind. I've already mentioned onshore wind. Also big opportunities in carbon capture and storage, where we've just embarked on a joint initiative with Equinor and BP in 2 projects, one in Teesside and one in Merseyside, to capture carbon to support some of our energy intensive industries, to support them to continue, and investments in areas like blue and green hydrogen. So big opportunities in the UK. When we hosted the International Investment Summit in October last year, we managed to attract £63 billion worth of investment into the UK, and that was in 2 key areas. First of all, AI, and second in clean energy. I think that shows where the big investment opportunities are in the UK. I would just add to that the area of life sciences, 3 fast-growing areas where the UK benefits from real comparative advantages. We've got 4 of the top universities in the world in the UK. We've got great entrepreneurs, great ideas coming out of those universities, and as a result, lots of investment coming into those sectors.
So I want to ask as well around the sort of fiscal pressures that the country faces. So borrowing costs rose to some of the highest levels they've seen in years just recently. And at the time, you came out and said, we're not breaching our fiscal rules. That may seem like a tough line to keep holding. And I mean, if you find yourself in that predicament again, when you're sort of, the markets, you're coming under pressure, would you look at raising taxes or pulling back on any of the spending commitments that you've made?
Well, first of all, costs of government borrowing did rise earlier this year. They've fallen back since, but that was a global phenomenon. It wasn't something that just hit the UK.
It hit the UK worse, right?
To be honest, our bond yields pretty much tracked what was happening globally, and the source of the volatility mainly came from uncertainty about what was happening in the United States. But I'm not going to give a sort of running commentary on financial markets, but what I have been really clear about is that the fiscal rules, and those fiscal rules are to balance day-to-day spending with tax receipts and to bring debt down as a share of our GDP, those fiscal rules are non-negotiable. We will meet them. We will continue to meet them. We have some headroom in the against those fiscal rules in the budget that I set out in October. But if that headroom comes under pressure, we will find ways to ensure that we continue to meet those fiscal rules. And the reason why that's so important, and a sort of point of principle for me, is that economic instability and fiscal instability has plagued the UK for the last 2 years. We saw it particularly when the last Conservative government under Liz Truss crashed the economy by playing fast and loose with the public finances. And I've been really clear when I was Shadow Chancellor in the run-up to the election and since, that I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, because when you do so, you play fast and loose with family finances and you make the cost of capital for business higher. And that uncertainty is bad for families and it's bad for businesses. So those fiscal rules are really important to me, really important to this government, and we'll continue to meet them. We've asked the Office of Budget Responsibility to give an update, economic and fiscal update, on March the 26th. I'll set out the measures that are necessary, if they are necessary, to ensure that those fiscal rules are continued to be met.
And quickly, what's your prediction for inflation?
I was once an economist at the Bank of England and was involved in those forecasts, but not anymore. So I will leave that to the independent forecasters. Inflation in the UK, the most recent numbers fell from 2.6 to 2.5%. Our target is 2%. The Bank of England and others have that inflation, I think, going up a little bit over the next few months, but then falling to 2% over the forecast horizon.
So one other thing I wanted to ask you about, there's been an exodus of high net worth individuals from the UK. You read about them sort of leaving, they don't want to be there anymore for all sorts of reasons since Labour got elected. Does that worry you, and are you going to do anything to try and stop that exodus?
I absolutely want Britain to be a place that encourages the most talented people in the world to come. And I'll just say a couple of things about that. We announced earlier this week that when we publish the immigration white paper later this year, we will consult on looking at visas for the highest skilled people to come in to the UK, particularly in areas like AI and life sciences, where I've already mentioned the UK has huge potential, because we want to be the place that attracts the most talented people from around the world. And when it comes to the issue of non-DOMs, look, the previous government and this government have increased taxes on non-DOMs because we need to raise revenue to fund our public services. Debt as a share of GDP is close to 100%. We've been running persistent budget deficits. We needed to raise money. We haven't increased corporation tax. Corporation tax remains at 25%. We haven't increased taxes that working people pay on their incomes, but we have increased some taxes on the wealthiest. But we have been listening to the concerns that have been raised by the non-DOM community. And in the finance bill, we will be tabling an amendment which makes more generous the temporary repatriation facility, which enables non-DOMs to bring money into the UK without paying significant taxes. And in addition to that, I would just say there's been some concerns from countries that have double taxation conventions with the UK, including India, that they would be drawn in to be paying inheritance tax. That's not the case. We're not going to be changing those double taxation conventions. And so countries like India, non-DOMs from India, will not be affected by the inheritance tax changes.
Okay, I want to open things up to the floor for some questions in a second, but just quickly before that, there's been a definite vibe shift coming out of the US. Some would say, well, many would say it's a much more macho vibe. You're the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK. Do you think you're going to have to sort of match that vibe and bring a bit of what Mark Zuckerberg calls masculine energy to the job?
Emma, do you think that only men have energy?
Maybe we should both get chainsaws, yeah. Why?
Or maybe we should just carry on doing the jobs we're doing and doing them pretty well, if I would say. Emma, I've got plenty of energy. I've got plenty of ideas. I know what it takes to make the UK a successful and competitive economy. We're removing the barriers that make it harder for companies to do stuff in Britain. We're going to carry on doing that. We're a great economy with huge opportunities. I've been in Davos this week, banging the drum for Britain, asking people to take another look at the UK. We've had stagnant growth for the last decade, but that is going to change. This government are making the difficult decisions and prioritising the things that are necessary to grow the economy. And I look forward to working. Hopefully my opposite number in the US will be confirmed perhaps as early as today. Mm-hmm. I look forward to working with him because the relationship between our countries is incredibly important. We're big trading partners and I look forward to working with the US administration.
Great. Okay, questions. There's one here. Would you mind identifying yourself as well? Thank you.
My name's David Haig. I'm from a company called Brand Finance. We're interested in intellectual property and that kind of thing. My question actually is about the startup industry. You're obviously doing some great stuff with regulation and various different things. I'm sceptical that pension funds and banks are really going to change their ways. It's extremely difficult to get money out of them for smaller businesses, right up to mid-sized businesses. Are you planning to do anything in terms of tax breaks, incentives, whatever, to help that sector?
Well, thanks very much for that question, David. You're absolutely right. The pension funds haven't done enough to invest either in listed or unlisted equities in the UK. The pensions bill will be published in the first half of this year, and although the consultation has finished, I'm very happy if you've got things that you want to contribute to that. At the moment, there are 27,000 defined contribution pension schemes in the UK. The majority have fewer than 100 members. We've got to drive consolidation in that sector, and also in the local government pension scheme, where we're going to move from 86 administering authorities to 8 pools to manage local government pension scheme savings, to create some of the sort of mega funds that you see in countries like Canada and Australia to drive better investment decisions, get better returns. In terms of what we're doing as a government, we've also set up the British Growth Partnership under the British Business Bank to leverage in private sector money to help those start and scale up businesses that you're talking about. We've already had investments from, I think it's Aegon and NatWest Cushion into that British Growth Partnership to get that capital to exactly the sort of businesses that you're talking about. We've identified it as a real problem, but also as a massive opportunity to help scale up those businesses and to keep them in Britain as well. And I'm determined to do everything that it takes to do that.
Have we got another question here? Just wait for the mic, yeah.
Yes, sorry, just because the questions to add on to that, I'm one of those companies. I'm a British entrepreneur. My last startup was launched by your Keir Starmer's predecessor, Theresa May, at Downing Street. Unmanned Life, you had a company that was supported by the US, and we had a lot of back and forth. That company, I've left that now, and now I'm about to start my new AI startup. Why should I stay in and do that again in London with this particular difficulties around both the funding side of it, but also in terms of I would say the lack of clarity in what startup founders can do, not only in the equity side, but also you mentioned about control and maintaining that. And I found that very difficult with the current set of regulations. And I have to say, Companies House has also been very difficult for us entrepreneurs. And so, you're talking about people leaving the UK. I'm considering that as a British entrepreneur with multiple. And I'm on the actually progress list. So I'm one of those people. I've been supportive of this whole action for the last 10 years that has been going on. Why should I continue to do that?
I think a number of things that this government have done just in the first 6 months. We extended the EIS and the venture capital trust schemes by an additional 10 years to help angel investors invest in startups and entrepreneurs. The reforms I've made that I've spoken to Emma and David about in terms of pension funds to help entrepreneurs like you get access to that long-term patient capital. The changes we've made to the London Stock Exchange for founders when listing, hopefully if you get to that stage, would benefit people like you to be able to keep control whilst also accessing those capital markets, and things like the intermittent trading that you can try out trading on the London Stock Exchange before going for an IPO are also things. But also if you're in the AI space, you should look at the AI Opportunities Plan that the Prime Minister published last Monday. The investment zones, the regulatory reforms are all about trying to help some of those fast-growing sectors, particularly in areas like AI, innovate and stay in the UK. But we're very happy, my team, to pick up with you afterwards on specific issues.